Zero Day vulnerabilities are vulnerabilities that are not known in the general public or has been discovered at a large. Since it's the first time we see the attack, it's considered day zero, hence the name. And once a vulnerability is discovered, in most cases there will be patches released or signatures released within a short time span. And there are really a ton of vulnerabilities out there that at some point will be discovered. Remember, with a lot of software, it has millions and millions of lines of code. And even if we've been pretty thorough in checking the code, we still assume that at least 1% of the code has errors in it that may or may not actually be vulnerabilities. And the only real way we can protect against zero-day exploits is defense in depth. And of course patching our systems as soon as a patch is released and considered secure. We may also get lucky as part of our defense in depth that our intrusion detection or prevention systems, the ones that are behavioral based, might see the zero-day attack as an abnormality. But there is no way to make sure, so we have the overlapping complementary layers of security that gives us that defense in depth that can possibly ensure we have a chance to mitigate the zero-day attack. A zero-day vulnerability is the vulnerability itself. A zero-day exploit is code that uses the vulnerability, and a zero-day attack is the actual attack using the code. Make sense? Let's look at a practical example. The Stuxnet worm was a worm that targeted Iran's nuclear centrifuges, and it used 4 unique zero-day exploits, which at the time was previously unheard of. Most attacks would just use 1. And it has been alluded to that it was developed by the United States and Israel, and it took them 5+ years to develop, and is estimated to have cost hundreds of millions of dollars. The Stuxnet worm would have 3 separate components. A worm that would propagate itself through the system, a link that would automatically execute the propagative copies of the worm, and then a rootkit that would hide itself and prevent the detection of the Stuxnet. The worm would spread itself as much as it could. That's what worms do. And it would scan for Siemens Step 7 software on any of the computer it was on, and it would need to control a PLC. If both were not present, Stuxnet would just become dormant inside that computer, but the replication would continue. It would replicate itself to other devices. And it is believed to have infected hundreds of millions of devices. But since it was so specifically designed only to look for Siemens Step 7 PLCs and the uranium centrifuges, on pretty much any of those 100 millions of systems, it would just be the worm. Once it hits a very specific target, at that point Stuxnet would introduce the infected rootkit into the software. And it would just change a few lines in the actual code. But it would cause the centrifuges to spin slightly faster, breaking them at a much higher rate, slowing the nuclear program down. If you remember back to Domain 1, this is one of those cases where integrity is much more important than confidentiality. The US and Israel were completely aware of what Iran was doing. They understood they had all the code that they were using on their systems, which is why they could design the Stuxnet worm so specifically. All they wanted to do was change the integrity slightly, not enough to raise any red flags, but enough to break stuff at a much higher rate. The worm was believed to be introduced by an engineer that had it on his PC at home. He brought in a USB stick, and while the facility was completely segmented off from the outside, there was no internet connection. The fact that he was able to plug in his USB drive and infect it is another good reminder why we want to lock our USB ports down. This story is a little bit unique because it used so many zero-day exploits and it was so targeted, but it really is just business as usual. Over 120 countries have designed or is designing ways to use the internet as a weapon. Some to protect themselves, some to attack others. Most of them probably somewhere on both sides.